Hey, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to Dreamy Dreamland with Sensie Owl Bob. That's me. And yeah, it's interesting. I, if you listen to my show, uh, I kind of have this thematic thing of, back 10 years when I started this show, the first theme I had was called The Big Splat, right? And I talked about how the human race was, and 10 years ago was, before the, you know, COVID, before Donnie, uh, you know, it was 2016, give or take. And Donnie probably had come down the escalator and said he was running, but everyone was taking it as a joke. And I said, no, he's a game show host. This is what America needs is a game show host, right? And so that's. And I said, this is the beginning of the big splat. The big splat is like the awakening, the fork in the road, however you want to put it, where we stop having the global normalized version of what's going on, right? That we can get our cell phone really cheap because 8 million parts come together in China, come together, made and put together in China, and then brought here, right? So these extended supply chains, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which was a vehicle to make bigger profit. It's about profit. Capitalism isn't like democracy. It's an economic system, right? And the only thing capitalism is there to do is to make more profit. That's it. Look up the thing in the dictionary and it states, capitalism's here to make profit for the people who own the capital. That's why it's called capitalism. You own the capital. Capitalism is where the capital basically runs or controls the dynamic of the civilization, right? Instead of a religion, right? And instead of a king, or instead of all those other things that came before capitalism, right? And they're all different types of capitalism, right? And they're all different elements. And so anyway, we are now heading, into the big splat. The big splat is if you were to ever watch, are you a Star Trek fan? If you are, basically go to the early ones with Jim, Kirk, and Spock, and Scotty, and the gang. And, they flitting around in these faster than light ships that can, go from one end of the solar system to the other relatively quickly. And they got, outposts and all kinds of stuff. Very much like, very similar to what when, Christopher Columbus came here. One or two, handful of guys with a couple of guns, and they land in the Caribbean, and they find, oh, these people are kind of nice, and they go back to Spain. They take a few people against their will back to Spain and save the Queen. So this is what they're like. We can really give me, 100 guys with guns and cannon. I can conquer the whole place because the Indians really didn't have war. Now, they were human beings, they had conflict, they had stuff like that, but they were smart enough not to go after grandma and the kids, or the crops. They basically, okay, if you in one tribe has a disagreement with the other tribe, they had basically guys who were warriors, right? And those guys were young Turks, and they would go out on the field and they would, play a game like soccer or lacrosse and if you had the ball, the opposing team could kill you for the ball, right? So that's, but it was a small group of people killing each other to get over a dispute, right? And that's how they did it. So they didn't have guns, they didn't have they had warriors, but those guys had rules and regulations. And so when Spanish showed up and they, would, just kind of whack the Spanish guy with a broomstick and call it coup, meaning you were being dishonored. The Spanish guy would just point his gun at him and blow his head off, right? So that's kind of the mix where we are in culture and social and dynamic. And in the Mideast, you had all, just had sand out there and all these different folk who had their God. It was the same God. There's no difference between the Hebrew tribes and Christians and the Muslims. They're all Abrahamic. They're all the same folk. They all have the same God, the source, right? Now, they call it different names. They have different aesthetics, but that's about it. And the thing about the Hebrew nations, they were like with Moses, they were the religion of the law. So it had all these laws, right? And so they kind of, over hundreds of years, they were the chosen people. That's how they advertised themselves. And, God always had their back. And sometimes God had their back, and other times he turned them into a pillar of salt. So that has been, basically Jews, there's a place called Judah, in Israel, and so those were the Jews that, who came from Judah. And the other, that's only one cul-de-sac of lots of different cul-de-sacs. Nazarenes, that's where Jesus came from. Now, there were different sects, too. There were Essenes, right, and the Gnostics, and basically they were Christians way before Jesus even showed up, right? And that's what people don't understand. They basically wear their religion like it was a blue suit, They basically just live in a silo of their prejudice. Now, when I say, you're prejudiced, they go, oh, what are you talking about? I have a black friend. Well, no, moron, that's racism. Not prejudice means you believe in your opinion. Someone says, do you vote? And I said, no, why would I vote? And they said, well, but you can't be an American. I said, no, I can, I really can. And I don't really, if you vote, what do you vote? You vote twice a year, right? I said, do you vote in the, for your city council? No, I don't do that. Do you vote for, who's running your school? No, I don't do that. But I do vote for my congressman and for my senator, right? I said, oh, isn't that nice? How often do you do that? Every 2 years, right? And how long does that usually take? Oh, maybe an hour. So every 2 years, you spend 1 hour of your life and that makes, voting, and that makes you an American. Oh, they didn't like that thing. I said, have you ever studied any of the laws that are being passed by your congressman? Do you even know who your congressman is? I think most of them don't. Anyway, so that's how people in America. So America, through all its history, because so many people come through here, and it was so big, and you could just leave town and go further west and go to a place where there's nobody. If you bumped into some Indians, you could get along with them. They could be good neighbors, and they'd be fine, and they'd be nice, and they'd watch your back, you watch their back, right? And there's this sensibility that's in Americans, that's kind of what happens. But when the corporations, like in 1871, the Supreme Court made a ruling saying that corporations have same rights as individual citizens, right? An inanimate object has all the rights, freedoms that a human being has. And there's something wrong with that one. And then, under the between Obama and now, a number of Supreme Court things. One was basically money is free speech. So there's no more limits on, meaning the thing that really screws up our elections is that they're bought. And that's why I don't vote, because every single congressman, senator, dog catcher, they're all on someone's take. Sorry to tell you that. And all the banks are gangsters, right? Sorry to tell you that. And basically our utilities used to be public utilities. In 72, when the big brouhaha came with Richard Nixon, and we went off the gold standard and went on the, dollar, the oil dollar. That was Mr. Rothschild. He basically purchased the United States, and everyone on it, right? If you ever go into a courthouse or church or any place they have a voting, there's two American flags, the one that you see up in front of the post office and then the one that has a gold fringe around it. And the one that has the gold fringe around it is basically the admiralty law. We have common law and admiralty law. And admiralty law denotes that you are owned by the system, by the state, and the state is a corporation. 1871, the United States became a corporation. And when you were driving around the country and you drive into this town, the incorporated village of this, the incorporated city of that, the incorporated county of this, the incorporated state. That's the world you're living in, right? So all these wars we're having, who makes the money? Good old Ike tried to tell us that just before Jack was, that's not what our country can do for you, but what you can do for the country, right? So before, 40 minutes before that speech, basically because Ike was still president, he told the civil defense people, okay, here's an executive order. I want you to turn on every radio and TV. I'm going down to the TV studio in the bunker, and I'm going to make a little speech before Jack gets elected. And that's when he gave the speech about the military-industrial complex. And he did you should go listen to that. It's on YouTube. And that's where we are right now. And that's why since Jack got whacked, basically, we've had non-stop wars, right? And we have, after, Russia, when we had the Cold War, right, with the Soviet Union, they were our loyal opposition, and we were their loyal opposition. We gave them whatever they needed. When they had a bad year growing food, we gave them food so they wouldn't starve. When we needed, rare minerals, like magnesium and cesium and lithium and uranium that we made into nuclear weapons, that we were going to point at them. But everyone knew you couldn't use a nuclear weapon, right? Because there's a use to have a nuclear weapon, just why North Korea has one. Everyone now takes them serious. But Iran, they could have made one a lot, pretty much any, they could have made one in the last 20 years. They had smart people, they had the uranium, they had the industrial, because making a nuclear weapon takes a certain level of industry, right? It's really not magic. It's industry. It's mostly chemistry too, right? Taking uranium into, weapon grade material is a industrial process, right? And it's a very, it's not that difficult or hard to understand, but it takes a lot of resources to do it, industrial resources. And when, everyone got pretty irritated with the Shah in Iran, because he was just, in 1953, I guess it was, somewhere around then, after World War II, everyone, England came in and just poked holes and found oil, like right there, right? And so it was like jet plant, and so basically that's how we got between 1891 and 1930. That's how we got the oil countries. And they're not countries. They're just, mobster families who made deals with bankers in New York and in the city of London to, own and control, Amoco. What's Amoco? That's the American oil company in, Saudi Arabia, right? So anyway, so we're going to have a change, because we have to have a change. And Donnie came in, drill, baby, drill. I mean, we had more oil. We didn't need to drill anymore. And but what is going to why we're going to have really serious energy problems is because between 72 and 2012, we basically took, whatever industrial abilities we had, and we kind of offshored them, right? And we took all, our oil production. We can only make distillate from oil sands. We used to make it from every kind of oil there was, right? And in the United States, we have more sweet oil than we have oil sands. Now we get all the oil sands from Canada and from Saudi Arabia and Mexico. And why is that? You ask, Sensie Owl Bob, why is that? And that's because Greenland, Canada, Mexico, and Venezuela and the Caribbean are ours. And they have been ours since the Monroe Doctrine, right? And they really made it like official in 1947 when we had the National Security Act of 1947, which basically took all the control, the power, everything out of the hands of the politicians and put them into the what is known as COG, continuation of government. It's a entity that kind of came out of Majestic 12, right? When we started discovering the ancient technologies that were all over the planet, and the Nazis found them first, and I mean, Tesla found them first, really, at least in the 19th, 20th century. And that's why he was kind of kept in slavery, He was kept in, and that's why, you hear the Manhattan Project, right? And basically, why they call it the Manhattan Project, because Nikola Tesla lived in Manhattan. And he had pretty much turned everything from New York City all the way to Montauk underground into a unbelievable science fair down there. Because there were other, he just kept discovering, like he discovered the shit. When he discovered zero-point energy, he was out in Colorado Springs, and he found a whole bunch of these caves and found all this ancient technology, and he was smart enough to figure it out, right? And so that's a thumbnail version of that. Does anybody want to comment anything about this? Howdy. Who else is here? Right, come on. Hey there, Fish. Good to see you, baby. It'd be nice if other people were here. But Fish is one of the old timers. She's part of the cadre. So anyway, so right now, like back in the 80s, I had one foot in the esoteric sciences, and I had the other foot in the more, tech bro sciences, computers and mostly high energy stuff, right? Oh, there's somebody else. Is that you or is that you? 4043, good to see you. It's still me. So anyway, I had a lot of exposure to pretty exotic, interesting, esoteric, and occult. And in every language, in every religion, you have those. You have the text for the people. That's like the Torah. If you take the Hebrew, the word Torah, and translate it into Greek, and then put it into English, Torah translates into English, "You suck." And if you read the Old Testament at all, you will kind of see that all it goes on about is how you suck. It's like God, G-O-D, he is a wrathful God, a jealous God. Why would any creator from the Alpha and the Omega, who knows everything, why would that God be jealous, right? Because if he knows everything, he knows why you did that, what is going to happen, all the rest, right? All he'd do is sit back in his easy chair with a beer and watch the show. He wouldn't get jealous. But all through the Torah, God, and if you go to the last book of the Old Testament, it's Malachi. And it's only 5 pages. It's the shortest book there is. Before you hit on, I heard the God of Old Testament was a prick. True. The real story is you kind of should go to the Essenes and the Gnostic gospel, right? And also the gospel of Jesus. Who knew? God actually wrote a gospel. Didn't put it in the King James, right? His brother Timothy has a really good gospel. Didn't get there. And the other, Mary Magdalene, who bankrolled that whole 3 years, and she was the money bags behind it, right? I am me only. No, no, no. If you want to have a rich life, what do? You have to be part of the cadre that says, the we in me, and so say we all. Meaning, your life isn't about you. It's about everybody else. Strange parent, yes. So, the book by Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, that's about, bad parenting. You know, Dr. Frankenstein makes a creature, just pretty much like every time there's a baby, it's a creature. Strong parent. Now, a strong parent is a loving, patient parent. That's a strong parent. Whacking you around, causing, turning everyone into salt, flooding the whole planet. Not really. Yep. Anyway, so the bottom line is you got to realize that you aren't that body. You aren't that bag of water. You're not that mud puppet. You're not that meat sandwich. You are a spirit. And that's the real conflict. See, if you read the Gnostic teachings and also the scenes, basically there's a thing called source, right? And source was before everything else, right? It was before the God that we call God, right? Before Yahweh, before, and the Old Testament in Genesis in the beginning, and in the beginning, things were, and God said, "Let there be light." Before any of that, before letting anything happen, there was, a entity, a spirit, right, a source, right, that was always there, right. It had no sense of time, beginning or end. It was just always there. He was in the moment, always in the moment, and at a certain point, he became conscious of that moment, and that's what is known as consciousness. So he said, "Oh wow, look at this! I've been here for whoever knows how long, but I've been here. I'm the only guy here. So why am I here? What am I doing?" And then he found that he could manifest, as so can we all. And so he manifests entities that started making the universe, and that's the Elohim, and that's God in plural, right? And as he did that, he did it in balance. Source did everything that he manifested, and these other gods couldn't manifest per se. They could only do what Source manifested into them to do, right? And so if you go read, I'm not going to tell you the whole Gnostic Bible story. And also, the Ethiopian Bible, that's a pretty good one. King James only has 66 books. I think the Ethiopian one has like almost 90. So why they take those from it? It's the same Bible, except the Ethiopian one has more books than the, the King James. And who is King James? He's an English king who got tired of the Vatican telling him what to do, so he wanted to have his own version of Christianity. He realized it was a good business plan, right? So, what kind of fish are you? She's a really good fish. Fish is fish. Right, so anyway, where were we? Oh, yes, Gnostics, right? Source, right? So manifesting and these things that would create things, right? That in conscious, would have conscious. And that conscious was in balance. So there was a feminine side to that consciousness, and there was a masculine side, right? And the feminine was the one that always was the creative side, and the masculine was the energetic side, right? So, and when they were in balance, they could do really groovy things. So it went along that way, and then Sophia was created. And Sophia was the force of truth, that apple of, the knowledge of good and evil. That was kind of Sophia. And soon as she was, bang, brought into consciousness, without waiting for the balance of eros, knowledge, she started going at it, right? Oh, wow, she was so excited to find truth, right? She just went at it big time. And she manifested pretty much the world we have. So that's why the feminine gets a lot of, it's so much more powerful than male. It brings life into the world. It's that doorway. Men aren't that. They're just, sperm donors. And workhorses. That's what men do, right? So women are that creative force, mother of invention, not father, right? So that's kind of where we're out of balance, right? And so the folks who are in the esoteric and occult levels of understanding, they aren't the big boss. They aren't the top. They aren't the source, but they are in upper management. And they realize that they have to keep the show going, even though there's more entropy, meaning more wearing away than there is building up, right? And so that's kind of what happens. So for things to be built up, there has to be a big amount of chaos and strife and struggle, and people go, wow, we better fix this. So that's where we have, for 70 years had this entropy going of this corporate entity just grifting all of the positive energy that is humanity into their own pockets. And that's why Donnie is here. He is he's a game show host. He is showing us, he lies so much, he tells the truth. He's, and so much so that because we're all going along with it, look what we did for, and then when JoJo, the used car salesman, came on board, see, Donnie couldn't get back to back. He needed that space of JoJo because JoJo, even though he won the Congress and the Senate and the presidency for that first 2 years, he basically did everything with executive order. He didn't make any laws. Nothing stuck. And all he did was he kind of opened the door for Donnie to come in the next time with the Heritage Foundation and all those lawyers and morons like Elon Musk to just, take a chainsaw to everything. And so we're at that chainsaw period, right? So it's obvious that, and I keep saying this, and people go, "What are you talking about? How?" I keep saying that the war in Ukraine and Russia, that's a scripted show. The war in Africa, all those wars in Africa, it's all those countries, Sierra Leone, Senegal, you name the African nation that's going through a horror show of war. And they all have resources. All the countries in Africa that have kind of peace don't really have anything except people, which is the best resource to have. And they're trying their best to do their best with that. I mean, if I was younger, if I was in my mid-20s, I would go to Africa. I would go do my homework. I'd find the most, peaceful, out-of-the-way chunk of Africa and go there, right? And find a nice little city that I could fit into and do art and be the art party ringleader, cultural provocateur I could be. And, especially if I went there at 25 with all that I know now. So what we're going to have is an experience. So good old Gene Roddenberry made, Star Trek. He was the creator, right? And you know what Gene Roddenberry was doing before he was working for Desilu, being a script doctor? He basically was working for naval intelligence. and he was working through the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission and the Club of Rome, and all of the intelligentsias, CIA, KGB, Mossad. They're all one entity. So Orwell, he was the same thing. He was in English, he was just like Gene Roddenberry, right? Now, they didn't have TV, but, he came back from doing that in India and Africa, and he tried, and then he taught at, I think, Oxford, and he wrote books, right? And the one, just in 1984 was published just a day or two before he died. He was trying really hard to put that together to be his opus of what his experience was, right? So that's why I do these YouTubes for you guys. This is, I've written a bunch of novels. No one wants to seem to write them. I have friends who are in publishing. I've showed it to them. I have friends who are literary critics, and they say, wow, this is like art. But no one's going to read it. So I do it all in the glory of Christ and God, right? Now, those are nice, almost meaningless names, but source, everything I do is with source, right? And my conscious intent is with source. My conscious awareness is with source. And that's why I can live like a millionaire on like $3, So, and I, died 7 times. I still got 2 more to go, right? And I'm, allegedly, and, I'll believe it when I see it, I've had 7 wives so far. And I've had probably 12 affairs to remember, and maybe 50 girlfriends, right? And all of those, they were all great. There wasn't one, not a lot, everyone's nuts, so, there were a lot of people, and that's a lot of women, and that was a lot of dealing with different personalities, and being married, you kind of, I had a training marriage, right? Once I had one training marriage, that was with Donna Ann, and that was enough for me, right? I didn't need to get the church or the state involved in relationships anymore, right? Because I wanted my own, there's a word for it. But anyway, when the state and the church aren't involved, you know what the word F-U-C-K means? Fornicate under church and king. So I didn't want to be fucked, So I wanted intimacy. That's what I wanted. I wanted a relationship. That's what I wanted. I wanted fun. I wanted to have someone to make happy, and I wanted them to make me happy. And that's the thing I learned is that you want to be happy, you have to think about the other person, not yourself. That's kind of it. So, look at that, 33 coming up. I love it when it's like that. So maybe I'll talk for another. There it is, coming up, 2, 3. So, right now, we're in a war with that. And Israel, you should really go onto my channel, Dreamy Dreamland with Sensie Owl Bob, and go up there where it shows all the things I watch on YouTube. Go watch that. Look at all the stuff that I'm looking at, because that's the kind of stuff I kind of think about and regurgitate back to you on the shows. So I've been looking at I went to I was in Williamsburg, Brooklyn for 10 years, right? My landlord was the head rabbi of that whole neck of the woods of the Hasidim, right? And so he had a lot of juice in the Jewish Israel Hebrew nation, right? And he loved me. He said, I love you like a son, right? And so so I rented this place out from him, and I moved in there, and I had a lot of books in there. He would come in, and instead of just having the super get the rent, he would come up and he'd bring a nice bottle of schnapps or whatever he wanted to drink that evening, and he knew I loved black and white cookies. He owned a bakery. He pretty much owned everything, and we would talk theology. He loved that, to the point about 8 years into that, maybe it was 2 years after Don and I kind of split up. It's probably 82, right? He basically said, "You'll need to study with me at my Lubavitcher," meaning the rabbi school. I said, "Rabbi, you got to be kidding me." I mean, he said that to me before I met Donna. I met Donna in 77. And in 76, he said, "Oh, you need to do that." So, I kind of was in that, but more like as a guest speaker or guest visitor, right? And so that whole neighborhood and everybody really knew who I was, and that the head guy, he was my man. He was my godfather, right? I've had a lot of godfathers. Cardinal Cushing was my godfather in the Catholic Church. So anyway, so after Don, and I had a couple of girlfriends before I got married again. Basically, there was a point where I said, I was doing building a lot of night wiring and lighting. Lighting is more what I was doing to nightclubs and restaurants. But I was contractors too, and I had my team, my buds who were plumbers and painters and concrete guys and sheetrock guys and plastering guys, and so I had a team where I could do almost anything, right? So I did a lot of things. I worked for Restaurants Associates. Did Windows on the World. We did Artie and Joan had this cafeteria towers right on Warren, off of Chamber Street and Varick, and it became the Odeon, the really super duper rich fancy place to go, because it had gigantic windows and great light, and the view of the World Trade Center was right there, right? And so I built a lot of restaurants, and it's not like I built them like with my little hands, but I went into the empty room with the guy who owned the place and said, "What do you want?" And then we went from there, right? And I had a couple of girlfriends who were great architects, like the lobby of Trump Towers. I had a girlfriend who was, worked for the company that did the Trump Towers, or the architect of Trump Towers, right? And, the most important thing, the building was really an amazing building, the way the whole structure of the building was, and how it was like the stepped thing, so all those apartments could have really amazing views. It wasn't just a flat wall, it's like a stepped in, it's kind of. And the lobby was the most important thing, because it had, one of the vision of the head architect was that it's going to be like apartments, but it was also going to be offices, and it was also going to have a mezzanine, and it was going to be like a little city inside, like a gem city inside of, that Park Avenue there. So anyway, so the lobby was the most important thing, because you're going to be seeing it from the street, and you're going to walk through those doors, and there it's going to be, right? So my girlfriend, she was worked for that company that was the architects of the whole building, and she worked for this architect, and his little part of the project was the lobby. This guy was a great architect, had a lot of shtick, and so they're building the building, and from the very beginning, he was trying to get what the lobby should be, but the Trump organization was so just piece of crap, unbelievably incompetent piece of just kind of what our government is right now, right? So anyway, all I could hear from her is like the complaints of, "Oh my God, this blah blah blah," and they haven't even started building. So I'm in Local 3, I know all the guys who are going to be working on that. Mike actually refused to work for those people ever. He got around them and just was like, "Fuck this shithead," and he didn't really say anything. He was understood politics, so he just did other stuff like the World Trade Center, like the Seagram's building, like the United Nations. These were really important buildings. Donald Trump building, not so much. I mean, it was interesting. It was nice. Anyway. So, and the Pan Am building, that was another building they did. So anyway, my girlfriend, she's, it's not, she's just working for the guy, right? The head architect for the lobby, but she's having to do all the, he wants this, so she has to do all the, research and the this and the that, and then the preliminary drawings, so he can show them to the the orange cube, and orange hot dog or orange whatever you want to call them, and he can't make up his mind about shit, right? So the years, time is going by. The building's being built. The lobby hasn't even been picked. So building's almost done. Lobby hasn't been touched. It's just like cinder blocks and chunky concrete and the glass windows in the front. That was about it. But nothing else. Not the floor, not the ceiling, not the walls, nothing. Right. Anyway, so they got like 6 months to do it. Right. And the orange cube, he can't come. They give him all kinds of. And so basically, the guy who's the architect, world famous, has a heart attack and he dies. And my girlfriend is put in charge, and she's worked for this company. She's done everything. She's really a great architect. She's done a lot of stuff on her own, nice buildings here, there, and everywhere. She had the license, the whole thing. And she's a woman, too. She's one of the few women who had respect. She was part of that architectural brotherhood organization, like I was part of the IBEW. I was part of the ISIS Foundation. I was part of a lot of things. Anyway, and that's why we were a great team. She was the best at what she did in that. And I took care of everything else, right? We had a loft in Soho that she just loved. And she did a lot of, so I would, early on, I had, I was working there keeping factories going in Soho, like in the 60s and early 70s. And basically there was this company called, I forget it, but Benny was the super of all the buildings. And people who really owned Soho was whatchamacallit, Con Edison, because they were going to build a nuclear reactor there, because they had all these steam lines, because Edison couldn't transmit electricity, so he could transmit steam. That's why you see movies of New York and the steam is coming out of the drains. Because there's steam lines everywhere. And so they sold steam to buildings to heat the buildings, right? So they were going to put a nuclear reactor right there in Soho to, so they didn't have to burn oil and coal and shit there, but they'd have a nuclear reactor there. And the NRC said, well, I don't know if that's a good idea to put a reactor right in the middle of New York City. So anyway, so they built one out there on the Hudson called Indian Point. But anyway, so we had our so I was one of the first people to live in Soho, right? And then the city kind of got on our case because we were living in factory buildings, and it wasn't zoned for that. But we're artists, so we want the big space so we can make sculptures and paintings and all that kind of groovy stuff, right? The only smart one of us was, Woody Allen, was, Andy Warhol, because the first thing he did was put a sign over his front door saying, "The Factory." So when the inspectors would come, oh, look, it's a factory. We can go someplace else, right? So, Andy was a smart guy. But anyway, so, and I'm being the electrician for everything and everybody, right? So I'm fixing all these old ancient factories and working on their ancient old machines. And that's how I came to work for Siemens, right? Because I was working on machines and half of them were ancient, German machines, and Siemens would come, oh, we can't fix that. And they see me fix, oh, what are you doing? How are you doing that? They had no even any idea on how to fix their own machine that was made in the 1890s. Anyway, so that's what I'm doing in Soho in the late 60s, early 70s, right? And that's when I meet the architect girl at, first I meet her at Hunter, and then she goes to NYU, and then she goes to Columbia, and then she goes to Yale. So she has a really good curriculum vitae. And then she goes and works for this big fancy architect firm in New York that did all those, like the Seagram's building, and this building, and that building, right? So, and so she's really good, right? The guy who was her boss grabbed her. That's how she got in that company, because he saw her curriculum vitae and saw all the, as she was going to all those schools, she was interning at all these other companies, right? Just to get real hands-on. And then she got her, out in Connecticut, she got her stamp, so she built a number of buildings, architected a number of buildings and fancy houses I got into the architectural journals, and the guy saw it, and he took her to Paris to do a building there, and he did a great job. So he got her hired into this new thing that he was going into, that he was one of the partners of, and then he dies of a heart attack, and she becomes head of that thing, right? So we had this house, this loft in Soho on Worcester Street, right? Beautiful, 8,000 square foot, gigantic, beautiful thing, right? And at one time, I got 2 other floors on 2 other buildings, and one was about 10,000 square foot, the other was maybe 6,000 square foot. And those 2, she had some, she came from a relatively flushed family. She couldn't go to those colleges, and she went on Daddy's money, but Daddy loved her, and Daddy knew she was brilliant, and Daddy did the best for her, as if it was his first son. Anyway, and she was the best. And so, anyway, in New York, where she got some credit, but she's still going to school. She didn't go to Yale yet. She was going to school, I think, at NYU. But I met her at Hunter, right? When she was older than I was. And my parents lived right across the street, right? Anyway, so, she was probably 19 and I was 16 or 14 when we started hooking up. And she loved my dog. And she loved the fact that all we did was walk through New York, and she would tell me all about the architecture of New York. I just loved her. And I take pictures of it. Take pictures of her talking about the architecture. So, and I give her the roles, and she had all those pictures. Anyway, so I've spread my photography all over the place, right? I was big on that. So anyway, so we're living together in Soho. I'm probably I'm probably 19, right? And I am trying to stay, I'm not living with my parents, and pretty much whatever, the machine, my address is my parents' address, right? But I haven't seen them in a couple of years, right? Because I went to Hofstra and I bailed with their money and didn't see them for about 5 years. So anyway, but before then, I met this girl when I was 14-ish, 14, 15-ish, and she was probably 19-ish. And then I met her again, and that's when I was in Soho, right? And she was going to NYU. Because I met her right there in Washington Park. I was there with Adam Purple, and she walks by me, and I go, Judy, Al, you've grown up. Yeah. And it was just like a scene out of a Woody Allen movie. It was like, but I was like Annie Hall, and she was like, she was better than Woody Allen, that's for sure. Better looking. Yeah. Anyway, so, we go over to one of those coffee houses on McDougal Street. We reaffirmed. I said, she goes, where are you living? I said, well, I'm living in this, on West Broadway, because it wasn't called Soho yet. And so she goes, the factory area. I said, yeah, come on. So we go there. She sees my loft, and he goes, this is fucking amazing. This is like, because I was on the top floor, gigantic skylights. The windows was just light in there like you couldn't believe. And she loved to paint. She loved to sculpt, and I'm a sculptor, painter. And she sees, what are you working on? Blah, blah, blah. She goes, do you have a girlfriend? And I go, no. I says, well, NYU sucks for boys, so why don't we pick up where we left off? I mean, now you're kind of, how old are you now? And I said, I'm about 19. She goes, and you're not drafted yet? I said, I'm trying to stay away from that. And she laughs. She goes, well, let's play house. So she moves right in. That's happened to me about 12 times. Most of my wives have just moved in. Anyway, so she moves in, and I have actually from when I was like, I wanted to be an architect when I was in 5th grade, because I had a great art teacher. And I had a great geometry teacher, and both those guys said, boy, you should be an architect. So I had my architect's table, and I had my little drawer of my architect's thing, and I had all that kind of stuff. So she was like, God, yes, I am so going to live here. And what she did was, her parents had an apartment in New York, and they were just about to have her redesign it as a project, and because they lived in Connecticut. So anyway, so she did that, and she moved all that furniture, even the kitchen that they ripped out. We took it out. I had some buddies. We went up there. We got all the furniture. We got the kitchen, anything that they were going to demo out. We took, right. And so we just kind of, and I'm working in the theater now, so it's like a theater set, So, and pretty much whenever I moved into an abandoned building, I would do that. I would turn one corner of the abandoned, burnt out building into like something that you would see on Park Avenue. So when people go, my God, look at that. So anyway, so she was the first one I did that with, and I kind of got all my chops of doing that kind of stuff with her, right? We were such an amazing team. So anyway, so what we do is, so she gets to know Benny. Benny loves her, and basically goes, hey, these people are moving out, and I'll rent you these 2 floors, one 10,000 square foot, one 6,000 square foot, because the business moving out had both of those, right? So he goes, that thing you did in your apartment, why don't you do that? Because now all the, all the artists are living here, but there was that article in the New York Times and in the Sunday section, and now rich people are coming in here looking for stuff. And so what we did was went up there, sliced the 10,000 square foot thing into 10 1,000 square foot lofts. And the other one, the 6,000 square foot one, we turned them into 2,000 square foot lofts. And what we did was we built the walls. We brought electric services up to each one that had their own meter, and basically kind of fixed them up. And what is the name of that real estate company? Sylvan Lauren, right? So Sylvan Lauren started to buy those buildings. And one of those guys from Sylvan Lauren, this is how I got to work for Sylvan Lauren, was they saw us, loading sheetrock through the windows. I took the windows out because I was going to replace them with the same kind of windows, but I was having relaminate them in double insulated glass. And one window, because all these windows were made out of leaded glass, and so every other window would be leaded glass. So those spaces would be 50% more, heat efficient, but still have the most wavy lead glass that there was. I would put in those, I relaminated those windows. Anyway, so I took the windows out, and I had the crane come up and put the sheetrock on the floor, right? So we wouldn't have to carry it up those stupid steps, and it wouldn't fit in the service elevator. So we did that. And that was like, most people didn't even think of that. So we did that. That was her idea. And so anyway, because I was in the union, I knew all these different union people who had different skill sets. And so, anyway, we did that. And that's when someone launched, this guy came up, what are you guys doing? And I told him exactly what we were going to do. We were going to slice it up, and then we were going to rent. I said, we weren't even going to rent these floors. What we're going to do is sell the key to get in the door. And then when they were in there, because we had really long leases on these, like 10-year leases. And so we basically put risers up, and we basically, had the disconnects in the basement and stuff, and had it so you could put a meter on that floor, but we didn't. We had a 10-point meter that did them all, right? So we were going to, charge them for their electricity, and basically it was not rent, but a service charge. Like go into a gated community, you have to have that, right? So that's what it was, right? So, you paid like, I think the first time we did it, we charged $20,000 a key, right? And so that got you in the door. Then so when they opened the door, what they saw was a sink, a toilet, a light switch at the thing. There's a circuit breaker panel there. and an outlet underneath it, and the light switch went to a light bulb in the ceiling, and that was it, right? And the walls were beautifully white, and the floor was amazingly sanded and stained and polyurethane. So it was like, whoa! And you had these gigantic windows with this light coming through, and it was like a blank slate, right? So you had the septic line up there, you had the water line up there, you had the gas line up there, you had the electric, right? So you could move it. You could like pitch a tent, or you could. And then I said, so if you want, my partner, my buddy here, my wife, we were a husband and wife then, but we weren't married. This was my first experimental thing of this concept. Totally committed, right? Totally, don't looking at anything else. She wasn't my girlfriend. I wasn't her boyfriend. We were married. Old man, ball chain, right? So anyway, we'd always meet these people together, right? And she goes, I'm a board certified architect. I work for this firm, but we can do, anything you want. And if you buy the key, you're going to get us, right? And we'll do it exactly what we'll charge you for it. So we would get, I think it was 20 grand, but we did it a few other times and that key fee went up. And so anyway, so we were doing that. And someone more said, whoa, I said, we're buying a bunch of buildings here. Come and take a look at them. So we did that for them. And that's how she got the job with the company that was doing Donald Trump's building. Anyway, so, and I'm not quite sure because we were together a number of times, meaning I had three wives. Beth B was one of them. So I knew her like from Juilliard, right? And she's a great dancer, and she was choreographer. She had her own dance company. She and her husband started the Kitchen in Soho. Anyway, but before then, it was really interesting because from Juilliard to when she met her husband, there were 4 or 5 times where we were boyfriend, girlfriend. Not married kind of thing, but we invented the affair to remember because we would be with each other for one time we were together for a year, another time a couple of weeks, another time a couple of months. So we really simpatico, but she, once she got into her dancing career, she was all over the place. Me too. I was all over the place. So we weren't in the same place long enough, really, to be long enough. But we had this amazing thing. We would come back from someplace we were outside of New York, and we'd come there, and we'd bump into each other, like in Soho or Uptown or Lincoln Center or, in a nightclub. And look, there you are. There I am. And she goes, I just got in town. And I said, me too. She goes, you with anybody? No, I'm not. We did that 5 times. And that was great. That's really where I got my chops on the affair to remember. So all of these relationships has made me who I am, right? Not just the intimate relationships, but my friends. And I've always loved my friends as much as I've loved my intimate cohorts, right? And that's called platonic love. So I have a lot of platonic friends that I love. Now, we're totally different. We have different ideas about everything, but we've known each other so long that none of that matters. The affection we feel for each other and all the experiences we went through, that's what matters, right? And, early on, they realized that I wasn't like them. I didn't have the same whatever background or political blah, 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 or any of the blah, blah, blah. But what we did have is a passion about life, experiencing it, expressing it. So most of these people are artists of one, literary artists, painting artists, sculptor artists, theater artists, you name it, artist. So I was in New York for almost 30 years. I was always going in and out. It was all over the place, all over the world, right? I didn't stay in one place, right? I was all over the place. And that's how you have a life. And basically everything early on when I was 2 years old, I had an experience with Source. I was dying, And I didn't feel bad at all, right? And I wasn't aware of my body at all, but I was aware of the source's consciousness. And basically, that's when I realized I'm part of this, not part of that. So I've lived my life as that, right? Totally. So here we are. We're at this crossroads, and they're doing everything they can. They're having all these wars. They're having all this chaos. Now, and I've been telling, back since Y2K, even earlier than that. I remember being, when I was in New Mexico for 3 years. Let's see, what years was that? 72, 3, probably 4, right? I was there 2.5 years, 3 years, give or take. And that would take another 2 hours to tell that story. Except I got about 6 months into being there. I was living in Albuquerque. I got stuck there because I was with Beth in the Robert Wilson Dance Company, and we were traveling around the country because we're putting together 2 operas. One or ballet operas, right? One called Einstein on the Beach, and the other was postcards or letters to Queen Victoria, or something like that. But anyway, and the book of that, the libretto of both those things was written by an autistic cousin of Robert's. Robert was a trust fund baby. He ran through his money, quickly. And then this guy, who was probably in his late 20s, Chris, was serious. He had Tourette's, and he was serious. He didn't know what planet he was on. And so his parents died and left him millions. And Robert was the only member of the family. So he became, ward of Chris and got power of attorney of all his money. And so he went back to his ways of, doing his art with Chris's money. But I took care of Chris for a good 6 months when I was part of the company. And I was I was their electrician, their masseuse therapist, their psychologist, their film. We weren't quite into video then, but I was making films, 16 millimeter films, and photography, right? And dancing, because I had gone to Beth at Carl Orff's dance class, right? That's how I knew Beth. And Beth was there I was there for lighting design, and she was there for costume and makeup. And she became, a primary dancer, right? Anyway, because and so she had a passion for it. But she loved making costumes and loved makeup, and so that went great for her performance art. So anyway, so that's how Beth and I met each other. That's, we kept bumping into each other, and then we become part of Robert's dance company, and that was loads of fun. Then we went on the road, and so we're in Albuquerque, and he would get all these rich people to let us stay at their place, and they'd be, oh, I'm a liberal, and I love the arts, and blah, 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 and, and we were like, communists, like we everything was, we weren't communists, forget about it. But what we did do that was quite nice was we basically, the community, because none of us were getting a paycheck, actually he'd always bum money off of us, and we would work for free, and so we were collective. We all had to agree on shit. So we're doing this show, putting together this thing, these 2 ballets, operas, whatever you want to call them. And we're in Santa Fe at this rich guy's place. And Santa Fe, if you've never been there, it's a city of rich people, even the county. And it's basically adobe houses with adobe walls. So I called it the city of walls. Really rich, fucked up people. They're so rich. But so anyway, we're in this guy's place, and he's like, we're talking about this, and he goes, oh, I love the arts, and I love, power to the people, and all that kind of shit, right? And this, the Vietnam War is still going on. Anyway, so we're there. Phone rings. The butler comes and he goes, Robert, there's a phone call for you. So he goes out and he talks. He comes up. Okay, kids, we're out of here, and we're going to Tehran in Iran. And we're, what? Yes, the Shah of Iran is putting on this, they have this Iranian festival of culture, and he wants to modernize us, and he's going to give he doesn't say the company, he's going to give me $1 million and start a nonprofit for me in Europe and get rich people to put money in there and pay our bills to go to Tehran and put this on. And we're going to be there for 6 months, and it's a beautiful place, and blah, blah, blah. And I already, I'm like, I'm not just an artist, totally stuck into my career as an artist. I'm like politically, I'm working for, Ralph Nader at NYPIRG. I'm, my friend who is like getting her career as a political fixer. I'm working with her, and doing. I have another friend who started the first women's shelter in the United States because women, women don't need a shelter. Men will take care of them. Anyway, so I was politically. Plus, I was at the UN. I had already had a stint at the UN there. So I kind of knew what was going on. Plus, my dad being a bird colonel working for General LeMay, who wanted to nuke everything, I kind of got a sense of the world, right? So I go, hey, no, we can't do this. The Shah of Iran is just one big scumbag. He's just an oligarch. He's a fascist. He's he's our slave. We that's our place. We own it. We control it. That's one of our military bases. No, that's he's an oppressor of the world, right? And basically Robert goes, everyone who wants to get rich and famous, get on the bus. We had a bus, and he was just going to drive, to the airport and fly to Paris and then head to Tehran, right? So, and they were going to be in Paris for a week or two or three to get. They had their people in Paris waiting for him to get them. They had a place there. They get all the paperwork done. So anyway, I said we can't do that. I'm going to block. We had consensus. I'm going to block, and that's what Robert says. Forget that shit. This is my company. Everyone who wants to be rich and famous, get this is. You can stay here with Al, or you can get on the bus and go to Paris and then go to Tehran and become rich and famous. Yeah. What do you want to do? What So all these people had careers, and I could always be an electrician. I didn't worry about money. Not Robert didn't either because he had Chris's. Anyway. So they all got on the bus. Even my girlfriend got on the bus and said, "Sorry, honey, you sure you don't want to come with us?" I said, "No, I have my convictions." Anyway, the bus goes out, and the rich guy who's like, "Oh yeah, so power to the people," he throws me out. It's like 11 at night. Luckily, it was like spring. It was like it wasn't like 20 degrees below zero. It was like maybe 50, right? So put on a coat, went out there with my little bag of stuff, and I walk, and I get to where 25, which is the interstate that goes north and south, and there's a big sign that says, no hitchhiking, 6 months in jail, $300 fine. No excuse. You get down there, the cop stops you, you're just going to go to jail. Don't even think about walking past this sign. So I'm like, it's like, now it's about 1 a.m. It's darker than dark. The stars, there's no moon. The stars are out there. And I go, you know what? I'm just going to kind of stay here. And there's no cars on the road, but oh, look, there's one coming towards me. And it took 5 minutes to get there. From the point I could see the headlights to the time past that spot. I basically say, I could just walk out to the highway, put my thumb out, and they zip by. I'll just walk back up here, right? So I did that 3 or 4 times, and about by 2:30 at night, no cop car, nobody, right? Just a few cars, a couple of trucks, and I put my thumb out, and it's this Mustang, right, right by, puts on a reverse light, and it was they had Bob McTurner Omer Drive or something like that. And it was a convertible, right? So the top was down because he was looking up at the stars. And I didn't see, it was just a blur that went by, but the blaring music, and he was half a mile down the road before the brakes went on and he backed up. Anyway, so I get in, and it was like a fire engine red, pink outside of the car, paint job, and screaming yellow, shag carpet, everything on the inside. And the guy sitting behind the wheel looked like Santa Claus, right? And I'm like 19, 20. No, I was probably younger than that. I was probably 18. I just kind of split from Hofstra. Yes, so that's kind of it. Right. So anyway, um, and when I split from Hofstra, Marion Tulin, who got me into Hofstra because she was on the board of Lincoln Center, she got me into Juilliard. Right. I said, why didn't you do that to begin with? She goes, beggars can't be choosy. I was just getting this job. I had a lot of power. I could throw you into Hofstra. I thought you might like it. It's in Long Island, blah, blah, blah. It's a nice school. And that's a whole nother 2-hour story of my life in Hofstra. So anyway, I spent those 2 years, from that to, my draft board caught up to me, I think, in 74-ish, right? They still, and, people thought we were out of Vietnam. No, we were still killing people there. Laos, Thailand, that whole Southeast Asia. We're still killing people big time. And they still had, army soldiers who were dying there too. So anyway. Um, the Mustang slows down, and there's Santa Claus, and he goes, where are you going? I said, wherever you're going. And so I get in, and he starts telling stories like I'm telling you stories. And he had a nice little lunch box, and he said, you want a sandwich? He gave me a sandwich. I was hungry. And you want soda? Here's blah, blah, blah. He said, where are you from? I said, and what did you do there? I said, well, I have a lot of stuff. I was a theater guy. I'm an electrician. I'm a plumber. I can fix, build, do, and I'm a painter, and I'm a sculptor, and I'm a writer. And I said, wow, you're kind of like me, but I can't do any of that stuff. I just have degrees in them. I said, what? He goes, oh, yeah, I got, he's the first guy who said this to me, I got more degrees than a thermometer. And what he was, even though he looked kind of like a white guy, he was actually Hopi. And his mother was a Hopi German lady, and his father was a straight up Irish guy. And so, but he was Hopi, and his mother taught him the language, and he also not only learned Hopi, but he learned Navajo. And also, he's really good with languages, right? And so he also learned, every other language, Russian, Spanish, French, you name it. He's a linguist. And there's a person who can just hear something and got it, right? That's why I had more degrees than thermometer. So anyway, he was one of those code talkers in the Pacific. And he got all kinds of, he saved thousands of people's lives. And looked like a white guy. So they made him, an officer. The other Indian guys, not so much. But he was still an Indian guy, and he was still an Indian guy. So that's why it kind of worked. And so when the war was over, he came back, and he didn't want to, you got it, whatever career you want in the military, you got. He goes, no, I want to go to school. So that GI Bill. So he went up to Chicago and just got went to the big fancy Chicago school that, he took a degree in everything. Then he started teaching, and then he retired. His mother died. He came back she was in Albuquerque, and she had a bunch of these randos, these round Hopi homes that are logs and mud. And she had a building that was a store, the bodega, general store. And she died. He inherited everything. He said, well, why stay in Chicago? I'm going to go check out, I wonder what Marfugel is doing. Anyway, so long story short, I went there. I did a whole bunch of shit. I ended up working for a company called Dick Powell Electric. You might go. And they were like the big whoopty. So anything that was being done at any secret base, Air Force thing, Dick had been doing it. And he was just like Grandpa Stoll and Mike. So there was Dick Sr. and Dick Jr. And, Grandpa wasn't Sr. because, Dick Jr. didn't want to be called Dick Jr., Little Dick, That Dave's going back. Little Dick, he didn't, no. He could be Dick, but he didn't want to be Little Dick. So anyway, I went in there, and I had already gone through this employment agency that I had gotten a master's electrician's license, again, through totally corruption. I saw this ad, looking for a real electrician. I said, well, that's me. So I called them up. They said, why don't you come on down? I came on down, got on the elevator, went up to, Blue Bunny Industries. And there's this guy, big fat guy. He's got long hair, like, to his back of his head, but it's dyed blue. He looked like the Easter Bunny, right? Anyway, so he goes, so you're the real electrician? I said, yep. And he hands me this envelope. He goes, go in that room, open it up, take the test. So I open it up, take it out. It says, New Mexico Master Electrician's License. And then it had this list of all the things you needed to have done to be able to take this test, right? And it says, if you don't get this, forget about even taking the test. I needed, 16 years. Everything you needed to get a master's license in New York, basically you needed that, right? 16 years of consecutive W-2 forms, X amount of time in the union, X of this. I had all that stuff, except not the 16 years. I had about 8 years. Anyway, so I kept saying, hey, listen, this says just take the test. Every time but it says just take the test. So I take the test, and then I go, about 30 minutes later, he goes, you have 2 hours to take this test. You're done? You want to quit? I said, no, I'm done. Here. So he had the answers, right? He kind of put them over there. It's one of those things you, A, B, or C, and you kind of black it in. So he put the thing over. He goes, my God. And he goes, looks at me. He goes, you got a 98. To get a master electrician license, all you need is a 78. I said, well, you're looking for a real electrician. That's me, buddy. He said, you're it. You got the job. I said, so what's the job? And he goes, you're going to work for this company called Dick Powell Electric, and don't make any jokes about the Dick. And your paycheck is $34 an hour. This is 1971, maybe. And I'm going, what? And he goes, but I'm taking $17 an hour off of that. So that means you're going to be taking $15 because, or $16 an hour. The average paycheck in Albuquerque, average electrician, guy who's just pulling Romex, he gets $2.75 an hour. And people think that's good. You're going to be getting, $16 an hour, right? And I'm taking the other 15, right? So, but out of that, you're going to get a master electrician's license. So you can start, you only have to work for this guy for 2 years. You can work for him for the rest of your life, but you're contractually connected to work for him for 2 years. And after that, you can start your own business with a master's license. Not only that, you need a Class 9 license, meaning driver's license. And I said, what's that? He goes, you got a driver's license? I said, no. He goes, well, that's good. And he goes, gets on the phone, match. I'm sending you a guy down. He needs Class 9, right? So I go, okay. Then he gets on, Bob, I found a guy. Yeah, so I'm going to fax you all his stuff. You fax me everything else right back. Okay, yes, you get your percentage. Yep. So he says, Lucy, take Al down to see Madge. And so she takes me down, and the DMV is in the ground floor of, Mr. Bunny's building there. So I go down there, and we walk in, and everyone's on a line, and it's just what DMV always is. She walks over to the back, she sees the cop, and we go to where Madge is waiting for us, and she's just in the room where you take the picture. No test, no nothing. She's got the sheet that's been, faxed to her, and she basically, says, sit there, look at the light, takes my picture, and then she's typed all the stuff in, my name, my this, my that, everything else. She pushes the button, and out comes a laminated, 2 copies, laminated driver's license Class 9. I said, so what's a Class 9? She goes, well, this gives you the authority to drive anything, tractor trailer, tank, Boeing 747, anything that flies, floats, or rolls. That's a Class 9 license in New Mexico. I was like, oh. So I had that. I go up, and there's Mr. Bunny, and he's got my master electrician's license. Not just the little card to slip in my wallet, but the nice thing, and he's got it already framed, and it says, my name and everything about me, and I'm a master electrician. So then he goes, let's celebrate. And he goes over to his little bar. He goes, what do you like to drink? I said, I don't really drink, but what do you like to drink? I'll drink that. He had this really great whiskey called Paddy's Irish Whiskey. And he says, see, this is illegal in America. You can't have Paddy's. And I go, what do you mean? He says, well, this is booze coming from Ireland that the Irish, resistance, this is what they sell to make money to buy guns, right? And so this is the best whiskey you'll ever taste. It was. And I became a Paddy's Irish drinker from that day on. And it was hard to get, but he had some, and he gave me a couple bottles that I nursed. But I was never a drinker. But he goes, you like the smell? And I said, what? My cigars. I said, those aren't cigars, those are blunts. And he smiles, he goes, over there. And so over there was it said, members only jacket. It was like a silk jacket, coat. And in the back, it had my little name embroidered. It's like, what? How'd you get that? Well, we have one with everyone kind of names. Like when you go get to your keychain, it's like, so there was one for you. Anyway, he goes, look on the inside pocket. So, I look on the inside pocket, and in it is kind of a leather-bound kind of, humidor, but it also has it kind of was like this. It actually kind of was like this. This is the thing that holds my cell phones in it, so if I drop it, it really doesn't break. And it has a little wallet in the back for paperwork. Anyway, so it's kind of like that, but it had blunts in it. But it also had 5 Benjamins. And that was my bonus for signing on. He said, after I signed all these papers where he got my, $13 an hour for 2 years. Anyway, so, and now all the people who have gotten a job today, we're having a party. It's like we've got food and booze and music and go mingle with all the other great people who've just been lucky enough to be part of the Blue Bunny family. So I got there with and everyone's got a member's jacket. And there's this girl there, and she's in a white nurse's outfit. She got the hat and the white shoes, the whole thing, and she's got her little button. And my mom ran a hospital, so I knew what that meant. She was a registered nurse, and she was certified, right? So she could, run something, right? Anyway, so, there were all these other people there, and they weren't too interested in me, and I wasn't too interested in them. And I was over there at the food trough, and I was putting food on the plate, and she was sitting there, and I went over next to her. I said, I had 2 forks. I brought 2 forks and 2 napkins because she had that nice white uniform, even though she's wearing this kind of very strange member's jacket. And so I said, hey, you hungry? And I said, you don't have any food. Oh, yeah, I'm really hungry. I said, you want to share this with me? Here's a fork. Here's a napkin. So we start, and we're talking. She tells me where she comes from and what she's done and done, right? And I kind of already knew because I could tell by her accent she's a New Englander. Anyway, so we're talking. I said, so I can tell by your little button that you're not only a registered nurse, that you have, a kind of discipline. So he says, well, I'm not only a nurse, I'm an anesthesiologist. I said, what? Yeah. And she goes, well, I'm certified to, be in the operating room and run all that groovy stuff, to keep you under. I said, really? I thought you had to be a doctor. She goes, well, you do, but also the nurse who assists the anesthesiologist has to also be certified because there's one of him and there's a couple of us. And this operation isn't the only operation he'll be working on that day. He'll probably be in 3 or 4, if it's a big hospital, be in 3 or 4 operating rooms. And some of them are on another floor, right? or another part of the building. And what means he has to take off his gown and go through the hallway and then go up. So somebody has to stick with that patient who is an anesthesiologist, and that's us. And we're like the special, groovy, she was like the, Jedi version of nurse. So anyway, so that's kind of cool. So her whole thing is drugs that will knock you out and fuck you up. So that should have been a foretelling of our relationship. So anyway, she basically, we're talking, and I said, so, what did you get? I said, how long you been here? She goes, oh, just I got contacted, Mr. Bunny contacted me in New England and offered me an offer I just couldn't refuse. I was making $8 an hour, and he offered me 50, and he takes 12, right? So just, so, and plus I was going to get all these licenses here that would make me virtually a doctor. And I could prescribe drugs. In New England I couldn't. And so I'm going, Anyway, so she said to me, so in your jacket, did you have one of those like wallety things? And I said, yeah. And she said, so what did you get in it? And I said, you got to tell me yours first. And so she got 5 Benjamins, but she got each one of those things that had a thing was a little plastic bag of white powder, right? And not only the same powder, but different. I said, oh. And so I then say to her, so, you got a place to stay? And she goes, really? I got off the airplane and came straight here, and I really got no place to stay. I was going to get out, with these Benjamins. I was going to go, what's a nice hotel to stay? I said, no, I got a place for you. So I took her back because I fixed up all those Hopi houses, right? And I fixed, Santa Claus's everything. That was like, again, another 2-hour story of the first 6 months that I was with him. And this was like my woo job. I mean, the first job I had was the guy out front of the Jack in a Box fast food place, where they had the guy jumping around outside, come on in. And I was in a clown outfit, and I was taught how to do modern dance by Carl Orff. So I was, bouncing around out in front of the restaurant with a big, enter sign, arrow, and I was flitting it around. Anyway, so that was my first job. Next job was pouring concrete. We nearly did Turo's, that's a whole nother hour story of that job. And I had a few other jobs. I sold, vacuum cleaners, Captain Jack vacuum cleaners. That was being sold by the mob. Anyway, so for 6 months I had some really kind of jobs, putting, car stereos in, every kind of low-end job you could imagine. I did it all in 6 months, so I didn't have to do it for a whole lifetime. Then I got this other job that lots of money. So anyway, so she goes, oh, really? I said, yes, come on. So, I don't have a car. She goes, I have a car. I said, thought you flew here. She goes, well, I rented a car. I said, okay, good. So good. You got to rent a car. Let's go. So we get in her car, and I take her there, and she loves the place because the center part is like a garden, because the circle of all these rooms that are almost like little apartments, and then the center is open, right? And basically, I put, glass sheets, plexiglass instead of glass. I found a dumpster full of these things, and a couple of houses I kind of covered that up. Anyway, so she loved the place. She loved Santa Claus. Santa Claus loved her. And so we had a great, And so Sunday I went off to work, and Friday I came home, right? So that worked out great. She loved that, and so she went off to the hospital, and she's making, she's making book. And I come home on Friday, get in around, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. We'd have a nice dinner, and then we'd have sex, smoke. She liked to powder her nose. I wasn't into that, but that was okay. And, we did that. We did that for about 4 months, right? And And she loved that, I really had nothing there oh, I'm not going to let her live there by herself because she could steal this. No, there was nothing there for me to even, I mean, I walked into Santa Claus's place with like the shirt on my back. That was about it. Anyway, so basically, for about 3 months, we did that. And the job I was working on was a nuclear facility in Grants, New Mexico. It was right underneath Mount Taylor, which the Hopis call the Snake Goddess. And it's this big sacred mountain to the Hopi. And the lore is if you screw with it, the Snake Goddess will consume your everything, your society, your people, your children, you name it. And it seems like that's what the Snake Goddess is doing to the United States right now. So anyway, that job was really, because it was like 2,500 guys out there in the middle of the desert, and they had this gigantic, almost like, aircraft hangar building. I mean, it's like, 50,000 square foot concrete floor, and we just slept on these little bunks. But there was no walls, no privacy, guys jacking off, shooting up, you name it. It was like being in hell, right? But the amazing thing about this job, because you had to be in hell, you were there from Sunday evening. You had to get there by 5 o'clock. You clocked in at 5. And you clocked out on Friday at 2. You got paid for all those hours. The time you slept, the time you ate, the time you crept, and there were 4 shifts going constantly. And my speciality, often I would be, hey, we need you over here to fix it, like 24/7, right? So every time they did that, I got paid even more. When I called up, hey, shouldn't I just be working 8 hours? I'm here, the other, 14 hours or whatever, 24, whatever. Anyway, yeah. He goes, I'm going to get you, whenever you there, you get time and a half. They pull you out of bed to do something, time and a half. If it's after, 10 p.m., you're going to get triple time. So he did that. So the first time the first week, I get my paycheck, right? And I get it, and I go, my God! It's like, whoa! It was like $3,500 for just, that first 6.5 days, or 4.5 days, however many days I was there, right? Like $3,500. And that was before they woke me up, before they started. Some of those checks were pretty hefty, a week. Anyway, so that first week, I said, so what do I do with this thing? And this one guy says, hey, we're going to go into Grants. There's a bank there, right? And so I go to the bank, and it was called the Blue Bunny Bank, and it was a trailer. Not a big trailer, a little one. Those 3 wheels that you put up behind your pickup truck. That was the bank, right? Anyway, so I go in there, and I have my check, right? And I have my whole, check comes with, my not W-2 form, but my everything form, right? It's not just a check. It comes and it's got a little chinkle thing that you kind of pull the check out of that. But that's for your bookkeeping, right? So anyway, I go in there, I got that thing in my pocket. I said, hey, this is my first week working out there, and I see this is the Blue Bunny Bank. Is that the same Blue Bunny, Industries in back in Albuquerque? He goes, yes. And she goes, oh, you working for Mr. Bunny? I said, yes. She goes, what's your name? She goes, oh, yes, you're right here on my list. She goes, you have your first paycheck? And I said, yes. And so she goes, so sign it, right? Now, here's 2 forms. Just sign here, sign here, sign here. And I said, and then she hands me, again, another little, quality thing. No drugs in this one, or Benjamins, but no, there are Benjamins, actually. So she goes, and in there was a thing. She goes, this is what is known as a debit card. And this is like 1972 or 1. And I said, what's that? She goes, well, it's just like, it's plastic. It's just like a credit card, but it's not, because it's taking money out of your account. All right? And you can use it anywhere, anybody. It's just like a credit card, but instead of you being charged for it, you're not. You're just taking the money out of your account, period. It's a convenience, right? And it will be around more often. But Mr. Bunny came up with this and figured out how to do it within the banking system, and so we're one of the first to have this, right? And so you're like a test subject of this thing called a debit card. I said, oh well. So she goes, so pick, you know, 4 or 5 numbers, and that'll be your PIN. That's your code. So, there's going to be machines where you can get cash. We don't have them yet, but they will be. And there will be other places where you might need to put in your PIN. And so I said, okay. So I gave her 5 numbers, and she tapped it into her little thing. But it was the size, she had it's like a shoebox, right? So anyway, she gives me that check. I give her the check. So she goes, we gave you this check. From now on, everything will be deposited automatically into this account. So you don't have to do this. You don't have to come here and deposit it. It'll just be right there. But that first check, that's why you had that piece of paper for your records. And then these other 2 documents are for your records. And you're all set. And she's, again, in that thing, there were 5 Benjamins. And I said, great. I said, so is that out of my account? She goes, oh, no. That's Mr. Bunny's little, another gift from Mr. Bunny. And I go, okay. And so, it's still it's not winter yet. And it's, still, actually, it was still winter. And I had no real coat or anything, right? And I had this they gave us these kind of, coats for, whatchamacallit, like lineman coats. And what it was like a sheep, gutted and everything gooed out, and they just turned it inside out, put sleeves on it, and the furry sheepy wool was like all around you and had a hood, and it was really quite warm, right? And the outside was almost indestructible. The skin was like really rough and tough. And anyway, so I basically had my new wallet with my debit card and my 5 Benjamins, right? So I go. The only thing that was there other than the bank, there were a couple other stores, but they were closed. But there was this one thing that was like, it looked like a truck stop, but it had no pumps. Went in there. There was a bar. There was a restaurant. There were a number of stores. It was almost a mall, and there was a cowboy store, and there was like other store. And then there was a place where you could get a shave, a bath, and a shower, and a massage with a happy ending. Anyway, so I didn't understand any of that, but I first said, I need some real clothes, because that coat was so, when I was inside the little trailer with the lady, she had the heat so up that I was like boiling in my big coat. And so basically I I fill all that stuff out. I'm walking. All my buddies have already gone inside. They're not even my buddies. They were guys I worked with. That the guy was going to go to the bank. He said, you want to come? You can put your check in the bank and maybe get something to eat. We're going to go and get something to eat and drink something. And we're going to go to he called it the club. And anyway, I said, okay. So I went with them. And they were, like I'm, maybe 20, if that. 20, 21, somewhere in there. And these guys were in their 30s, and they were skanks. They were just, I can be a hobo, but these guys were skanks because they were, they were shooting whatever they could shoot, They had holes all over themselves. Anyway, they did not look too healthy. But, to work in a nuclear facility where you're just pouring concrete and running a jackhammer, you don't have to be a college degree guy. But anyway, but I was, not degreed, but I had skill sets that these clowns didn't. Anyway, smaller than they were. I was 6 foot, but these guys were just like cows. So anyway, I'm walking, so I did all that. They're already inside. It's just across the street. Their van is parked right there. And it's like, I'm still like overheated from that thing. So basically, I take a Benjamin out of my thing and my new debit card, and I stick it in my pocket. But I leave everything else, all my IDs and everything in, you know, this wasn't a place where they're going to like deem me. Anyway, but I just kind of stuck it in there, thinking that much better just leave it in the car. I might lose it, blah, blah, blah. So basically, I go in there, and I'm just wearing kind of my overalls and my boots, and they were like funky boots, and I needed a new pair of something on my feet. Anyway, so I walk in, and the guys are over there at the bar just knocking them down, right? I don't go over there. They just look around. I go, you know what? I'm going to go in that store and see what they got for clothes. So I got a Benjamin, right? So I go in there. I might even take two, but I had more than enough money. So I kind of went in there, and I basically, got myself duded up, right? Jeans, and they had really nice thermal stuff. And I said, wow, I need this. I need these. So I bought a couple of pair of pants and shirts, and they were nice. And they were like, I put them on, and they kept me warm, but not too hot, right? And I had a nice pair of jeans, and they had Tony Lama cowboy boots, which were really, I don't know if you know about cowboy boots, really great, fun, nice cowboy boots. Oh, you guys have been saying stuff. What about you? You guys are talking to me. Was the feminine, masculine, interchangeable? You guys. See, I forget that you guys are so good. You're good. I hope you guys are talking to each other. Or so it was. Oh, look at this. You guys wrote a lot of stuff. I have to go back and read it all. Lonely well. Anyway, long story short, right? I get myself some really nice clothes. I'm still wearing my overalls and all that shit, right? And I put everything in a bag. And I go over to a place where they give you a shave, a bath, a shower, and a massage with a happy ending. And that's what it said, massage with a happy ending. So, I basically take the shower, and I lie in the bathtub. And there was a girl in there like, oh, can I wash your back? And so, right. And so then I go and, I put, I've taken my clothes off to get in the bathtub. So my old crappy shit, I got a garbage bag from, I think, the guy in the store, right? And I put all my crappy clothes into that, and I put on my nice new clothes, right? And so the guy gives me a shave, and then he goes, you want your massage? And I said, sure, so I go in there, and the girl is naked, who was like rubbing my back, and she goes, here, sit here. I said, massage it. I've been in, I know how to give a massage. Where's the table? She said, no, I just give you the happy ending. And I said, I don't think so. You like boys? We got boys. I said, no. I'm just not up for it at the moment. I'm a little over everything. Because I just dealt with a whole week of just insane shit. Construction site the size of like the, pyramids with, 2,500 guys running over like ants and just doing this you had to really watch your back or you were going to die. I mean, just in the first 4 days before I got my paycheck, 2 guys died, right? Just because of level of incompetence, and no one seemed to care. Just get the job done, right? So I realized, oops, like I, was given because I was laying stuff out, so I'd have to go to the engineering, place, trailer, and sometimes get materials, which in another, anyway. So I had to drive and the site was like 20 miles square. It's like all over the place because everything was underground. Anyway, but all the stuff building it was on top of the ground. So anyway, I think the second or third day I was there, they said, you're going to need to go here, and here's a little map of the place, and blah, blah, blah. because I, just started and seeing what are we doing. There were guys who were running things, and by the third day, the guy who was the boss came over and said, "No, Al, you're not, a rough hand. You're here to do specific, specialized stuff. So we don't need you laying pipe. I said, okay, good. I hate doing this shit. So he brought me over and said, into the engineering place, and said, this is what we're laying out, the power plant building. And so you just, today, just study this thing. If you got any questions about anything, the afternoon we're going to go over, they finished building the building, they've laid all the trenches, they got all the, Kendorf in, they got the pipe in. We're now going to, set the cabinets. And so I wanted to go there with you and basically lay this out because the concrete guys will tomorrow pour the pads that the cabinets will sit on. I said, okay, sounds plan. So we do all of that, and that, so it's about quitting time for me and him. And he says, so let's go. And I said, wait a minute. These pipes are like, 10 inches below where they're going to pour concrete. And he said, oh, that's exactly because we had these nubs, these hubs that go in. So before the concrete guy goes, I said, shouldn't we what if somebody just leaving that pipe? Where does that pipe go? How far is it? He goes, oh, maybe 2 miles over there. I said, this is at top of the hill. They pour concrete, and they're stupid just because I already experienced that, right? And I said, why don't we put something in those pipes? Why don't we cover them? I mean, like with cardboard or something. And he goes, well, there are these ends, this box of ends over here that because these are like 6-inch galvanized pipe. Each pipe back then cost $100 a stick, 10-foot stick. So, and they're already threaded. So they put this plastic cap on either end. So if it gets knocked, those threads don't get fucked up, right? So he goes, well, there's a box, just, screw those on there, and that has a lid. And so if they do something stupid, you're right, it's good. It won't all fill up with concrete. Smart boy. That's why we hired you, right? So I do that. And of course, they do that. And one of the pipes, somebody, I don't know why, took the cap off, and it totally got filled up, and they had to take it all up. Anyway, and that's the kind of level of competence. So 2 days later, the guy gives me a truck, little pickup truck, little yellow, super screaming, more screaming than this kind of color. And it has flags on big pieces of fiberglass that go up in the air by 10 feet. So you can see this thing coming from miles away, right? So, and there's signs everywhere, because they have these gigantic dump trucks that are the size of a building. And if one of those tires ran over that little pickup truck, it would flatten it like a pancake. So anyway, and there are roads that those big trucks drive on, and then there are roads that cars like my little truck drive on, right? And so the engineering trailer, I kind of pull in there. Now, if I was a smoker, or if I needed to pick my nose, if I had stayed in that vehicle, what happens is I kind of just pull in, turn off the engine, take the keys, step out of the truck, get 10 steps away, and then I hear this tremendous crash, crunch, turn around, and I'm about 6 feet from the tire that has just run over my little yellow truck and crushed it like a pancake. And if I had been there going, I would have been dead, because I really got out and was out the door and heading towards the trailer when that happened. Like maybe 20 seconds, maybe a minute, if that, right? And that truck had gone way, he was on the way wrong road, and he was in this place where he couldn't turn around, so he was going to turn it around, just back up into this little parking space for people's vehicles. And I jumped out, and he was I didn't see him because he was coming from the other direction, and he just pulled up and pulled back, and by the time I drove in there, he was those wheels were way bigger, so they went for every turn of that wheel was like 20 turns of my little wheel. So he could have actually easily, if I was running slower, he could have run me over while I was driving up, not seeing him coming up my back. That's how incompetent this place was. So that was my first week. So that happened, right? Next day, it's Thursday, and I'm basically get my check, and we go in town, and we do all that I explained, and I'm sitting at a table having a nice dinner after I have a shave and a shower, and I feel great, and I got my new clothes, and this guy comes out, and these girls one of the girls who wanted to give me the happy ending, she was with these girls. They were kind of and sat down and, can we talk to you? Can you buy us a drink? So I surely do, and all those clothes cost me $40. I mean, Tony Lama boots and $40. Anyway, so I basically am, once they realize that I don't want sex, I leave, right? So I finish my dinner, and, I'm listening to the music. There's this couple-piece band just tinkling away, and it's kind of nice. And this guy comes over. He goes, hey, you working at, Taylor? I said, yeah. And he goes, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a master electrician, controls and high voltage. Oh, so you're not a drug addict? I said, that's right. He goes, well, the boys that you were with definitely weren't. I said, why? Because they left about a half an hour ago. I said, what? Yeah, they just drove away. They were so drunk, they just kind of stumbled out of here, got in a van, and drove away. I said, but that's, I'm 40 miles from, how am I going to, it's, what? And he goes, don't worry about it. He goes, if you work at Taylor, you can come home with me. You can sleep on my couch, and you can basically, they have a bus at 6 in the morning. You get on the bus, they drop you off at all the different mines and facilities that are along that road. And that then goes to Taylor, so you can get up and go there. I said, great, thanks, right? So I sleep on his couch. He gives me a coat because my big coat is in that van. And so I kind of, get to Mount Taylor at the right time. And we gather, our crews gather at this place where they have breakfast. And everyone kind of gets their assignments, and their supervisor and those guys go and have breakfast. And so anyway, I'm walk in there, and the guy who is like the head organizer of all the different crews of his, feel. Anyway, he basically, and he's a black guy, right? He's a very nice guy, well-educated, always kind of wears, he doesn't, he's not wearing overalls. He's wearing pants and nice new shoes and a nice shirt and a nice jacket. He's not wearing, right? And so he's got his clipboard and he's looking at stuff, and he's like flipping papers and he's reading something. And I go up to him and say, oh, yo, Bob, what's up? And he looks at me, because half the guys I would have worked with aren't there, right? And I said, where? And he looks up and looks at me, and he turns white. He goes from black to white and faints. And he's, goes back, I kind of catch him and, put him down on the cement thing. And he's gone. And everybody comes over, it's a heart attack. And, the person who is like the safety officer knows something about, medicine of some sorts. I'm just standing up, and I pick up his clipboard, and I look at the roster, and I see this notification from the highway patrol that there was an accident and these people died in the vehicle. And my name is on that list. I'm going, what? And so the big supervisor of Bob's, so he looks at me, and he looks at Bob, and he comes up and he goes, Al, you okay? And I said, well, this thing says I'm dead. And he goes, yeah, I know, I saw that. So what happened? I said, well, those clowns got in the van and drove off without me. He goes, boy, you are one lucky son of a gun. And I said, why? He goes, well, these clowns were doing like 110 in that stupid van. And they had these big gigantic trucks that are size of buildings parked along the side of the state road because these trucks are so expensive. They don't just work on one project. They plant them on the side of the road because of the ones that are going to go from this site to that site. They kind of park them there. And these clowns went off the road, kind of tipped over, and smashed in the back of one of these things, going like, 90 miles an hour. And just everyone, it was like a blender in there. And the only way they got the names was through people's wallets, and they found your coat with your wallet. And I said, did you have my wallet? She said, oh, yeah, we got everyone, all that stuff came back to us. And yeah, we have your wallet. He said, I don't think you're going to want your coat. Because your wallet kind of survived it pretty well. It didn't get beat up at all. There's no blood on it, but your coat is like, you're never, no, I don't think you should bury that. That's what you should bury that. And anyway, so from that point on, my nickname on that job site was the Dead Guy. And there were three times I nearly died, not that same way, but so I was there for almost 7 months. And so every weekend I would go home and meet my honey bun nurse. And then maybe not even, it hadn't gotten to be summer yet, but it was definitely spring. And I used to say to her, it's not that I'm complaining that I come home and you made this beautiful meal, and then we enjoy it, and we listen to music, and we talk about things, and then we have sex for 12 hours straight. I'm not, and you're really good at that, and I'm not really complaining. And you seem to have found a really good source of high-grade whoopee, and so, hey, it's all good. But wouldn't it be nice to maybe go out to dinner once in a while, or maybe go to the movies, or, there's a lot of really good music here. She goes, oh, I know, I've kind of run into it. And she goes, you ever gone to the Tender Trap? I said, yeah, I kind of know what it is, but I've never quite been there. But it's on the other side of town from where I used to hang out, and so, you mean here? I said, yes, this is where I hung out. This is where I heard music, more Mexican than Chicago blues. But yeah, Santa goes there every now and then. She goes, hey, yes, I love Roger. Roger, that was Santa's name, Roger. And he was Hopi, not too, and I said, that's not his Hopi name. Anyway, so it wasn't even his name. That's the name he gave her. Because he kept saying, you got to watch out for that girl. So anyway, so I said, she goes, okay, yeah, that'd be fun, sure. I said, but she goes, I'm still horny, so let's just keep fucking a weekend away, and I want to make a cake tomorrow. So I said, okay. I mean, there was not much to complain about, right? She really didn't want, just feed me really good food, have a really nice conversation with her. She liked me reading her poetry, but majority of the Friday, Saturday, and then I go back to work on Sunday. So that's, maybe not quite 48, maybe 37 hours. I would say 27 of those hours was mostly sex, and wild. I mean, just hanging from the chandelier kind of. This girl was wild, which was not, it was, she wasn't kinky. She just was energetic and couldn't be satisfied. I mean, she was, she'd be, that was the best. And before she would be at it again, right? I never could drift off, right? Yeah. So anyway, so by the fourth week, I came back and I had two, that one with the truck running me over. And then, 2 days later, almost, if I had been in the van, that would have been it. So fifth week, I came back and I had met this on the third week when it was like a light switch. I mean, it was spring when I got there, like April-ish, but it was still pretty, it was early mornings. One time we were working on the first day or two before. The guy said, no, your skill set is not, putting pipe in troughs and outdoors now. Because one time there's a big pile of pipe that had been, at night froze, got cold, not snow on it or anything, but like cold. And we were putting this pipe in these troughs that were already, that pile was already in the sun. So it was like the sun hits it, it's like 60 degrees. Still probably maybe 20 outside, but you were running around in the sun working hard. I took I just was in my t-shirt working on this, and because we had this hydraulic wrench that would tighten the pipes into the couplings, because you couldn't do it by hand. You couldn't even do it with a wrench. You had this hydraulic tool. Anyway, so we're laying this shit out, and we're doing pretty good. And I have a thermos of coffees that my supervisor, because the last 3 days, shit has happened to me, and I haven't even blinked, and I'm still getting these guys to be relatively productive. And they were all 10 years older than me, and I was like, and one guy was the foreman, but he was he just wanted to sit and drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes. And the fact that I was like laying things out and putting it together and getting it done, he got, his boss said, well, you're doing really good, George, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I leaned up against the pipe that was in the shade. It was so cold that my sweaty arm froze to those steel, galvanized pipes, right? And I had my coffee cup in the other hand, right? But I had drank it all. There was nothing in it. And I said, hey, Larry, come over here. Why don't you piss on my arm? He said, what? What are you, nuts? Are you a homo? And I said, no. I don't want to rip my arm off. And this guy looked like a patchwork doll, because he had leaned up against the frozen pipe for the last 6 months. And so chunks of his cheek was going on his arm. He said, well, be a man, just rip it off. Look at me. I'm a man. I said, no, you're not. You're a moron. So I said, just piss on my arm. That will be warm enough so I can just take, it's not like ice. It's not like it's been there forever. It's just because my arm is sweaty and the thing is super cold, and I was stupid enough to lean on it, right? So he basically, you're just a homo. And I'll show you my dick, So anyway, I said, okay. So I said, fine, I'm just going to wait till I have to take a piss. So they were like, what do I do now? I said, well, you've been put in a place, go put it, but like I was the brain and they couldn't even figure out what to do. So they just sort of kind of stood around and waited till I needed to take a piss. I pissed in my coffee cup. Oh, look, he's pissing in his coffee cup. Oh, that's so disgusting. And then that nice 98 point whatever degrees of my urine, took my arm without ripping the skin off. That is the level of the freaking morons that work in the world of America. That's why we have the wars going on right now, because those chuckleheads are, look at Hexhead. That's just a Larry, He wants to shoot himself up with testosterone because his penis is so small. But anyway, he doesn't know that's going to make it even smaller. So, yeah. Oh, look, we're at 2, and there's only 2 people watching. And there's okay. How come my likes are bouncing between not being there and being at 7? I mean, what? Now it's back. Now it's gone. So anyway, that's the magic of good old, what time is it? Should I go to bed? Yes, I should go to bed. So this is a nice long show. Hope you liked it. It seems like you guys wrote enough stuff. Yeah, I'm going to go back and read it all. Do you still talk to John at all? No. Calling it a night. Well, me too. Catch you later. Yep. So John Boy is my friend. I pray for John. Going out. Praise God, praise Jesus, and bless John Birmingham. He needs it more than us. People keep asking, do you know John? I spent almost a year and 5 months. John threw me out of the school 31 times. Right? The Thanksgiving of 1917 when I came back to have Thanksgiving with him and his family, and he wouldn't come down, right? And I kept calling him up and talking to him, and blah, 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 blah. So, and I spent 3, 4 days at his parents' house with his family and his sisters, and really, really, really got to know his family, and I already knew him. So basically, that whatever so I got there maybe Wednesday. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and I was going to leave Sunday. It was a nice, beautiful, sunny day, great day to drive back. And my cell phone. You want to come and stay with me? You can stay here for free. You can stay here for as long as you want. And I said, well, John, you've thrown me out 31 times, or 30 times, and I'll never do that again. But that you've been saying that, you're like Lucy and Charlie Brown, and anyway, so basically, because I got a lot of food. I just ordered from, help me put it away, and so I go, okay, John. So I drive up there, and it's still sunny, and it's still, like maybe Sunday, 10 o'clock in the morning, right? So I said, we'll see. So, where I'm cooking food, he's talking to me. He's like trying to videotape it. And he's saying, I want you to stay here. We make films and we do it. And John and I had this kind of very strange energy when we were on camera, right? But it blew his mind. I mean, when we were at the height of doing that show, like when I did the old Crone stories and the other stories and the other stuff, and I would do cooking shows and we'd do little skits and stuff, we'd have close to anywhere between 700 and 40,000 people watching our show. And he was making some book on that, right? I never saw a nickel. And he kept throwing me out, and I have to say, 31 times he threw me out. Right? And those 30 times that he threw me out at the worst of times. It was snowing, it was raining, it was midnight, it was dark, I can barely see, right? And he threw me out where my life was at danger. He put my life at danger, seriously murder. And he would like be scary monster, angry and jumping up and get out, get out, get out, and with something in his hand. And now I knew John to know that. First of all, I knew martial arts. If he was really a threat, I could make him stop, right? I mean, I know pressure points where all I have to do is there's a thing right there in between that fleshy part between these two fingers, right in there in your palm. There's a point there. If you put that, you will shit yourself. Just like they're having this uncontrollable diarrhea thing. Isn't that a great disease for America? Uncontrollable, diarrhea. And isn't it great that some large corporation was found to be at cause of this 6 months ago? But isn't it great that our guy who's in charge of Food Drug Administration, for some reason said, oh, that's not important. We don't have to worry about that. And that's why it's going across the nation. So it's either like some kind of evil villain, Marvel evil villain thing that we were allowed to have done to us. It'll be interesting to see how violent that shit is. But it's pretty obvious that there's going to be just like, oops. I worked on a number of, in the 70s and 80s, especially down in Florida. I worked on a number of water and water desalinization, water purification, and a shit factory. I mean, for large towns, like the whole East Coast from Hollywood up to Jensen Beach, that whole water district, right? And down in the Keys, I worked on a number of projects that way. So I was exposed to what municipal water is like. And is electricity, do I need to charge you up? Is that what it's saying? It could be. And I don't like the show dying. Yeah, it's getting low. So I guess I have to go. It's been 2 hours and 9 minutes, but I pray for John, and we all should. He's a good boy. He's my friend. I never give up on my friends, but I'm never going to put my life in his hands. Never going to go up there. I'm a lot more frailer than I was back in 19. Even though I died in 2014, and I was getting over, from that all the way up to 2017, I was probably in really pretty a lot better shape than I am now, and a lot better shape than I was in 2014 when I died. But I would never put myself in, and I don't have a car to get there. So that's really, I'm here until God puts me in other places, which He will. He's got to. So my little thing with John is over. Meaning, I have great stories about John. There's still a lot of video of John and me, and like I said, if he had wanted to, we could have been Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, and he could have been Dean Martin. I could have been Jerry Lewis. He could have been Jerry Lewis. We could have done something, but he didn't. He has this. It has to always be just about him. That's why he hasn't seen his kids. And when he talks about the baby, it's his little girl. It's not his. It's the tow truck guy's baby. His wife wanted to get stooped. She went outside the road. She called up the, car service guys, and they sent a tow truck, and he stooped her, and 9 months later, Bob's your uncle. And he keeps calling her baby. She's like 9 years old, She was born probably in 2015, and now, so she's at least 10 years old, right? Or at least 9 years old, give or take, whatever it is. So she's definitely not a baby. And it's my child, my daughter. No, it's not. I don't even know who those are. His oldest boy, he looks just like John. So I'm saying, that's probably John's. But the other kid does not look like anybody in his family. Now, all of my brothers and sisters are very Italian. Black curly hair, dark skin, dark eyes. I look like my mom. I mean, you know who I really look like? My mom's great aunt, her twin brother who died in the Spanish-American War. I saw a picture of him. It's like, it's me. So she was a real bitch, real rich, gave nobody anything, and she basically loved me. So I spent a couple of summers up there, which was like Pollyanna. But anyway, that's the end of this show. There we go. Yes, it's right there. And that was fun. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you guys later.